Welcome. Good afternoon, folks. We'll get started in just a few minutes. And if you can mute yourselves as you come in. Sorry if you hear my dog squeaking in the background. Right, folks, in just a couple of minutes, we'll get started. I'm just giving folks time to trickle in. All right, friends, welcome, and thank you for humoring me with Michael McDonald this afternoon. He's one of my favorites, and you'll probably hear more from him later as we work together. Just a few, I guess, housekeeping kind of ground rules for us. Try to keep your video on if you can. Let's try to avoid multitasking. We want to honor this work. since we're present, let's try to stay present and be in this work together. I know I have you for 90 minutes, which is a lot of your time, but I appreciate if you can agree to that with me and also participate. So this is an interactive opportunity. So we learn from the group, the knowledge of the group. So it's so important that, you know, you participate. And before we get started, I want you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. We're going to take a moment to acknowledge the original custodians of the land on which we live and work. And this is often referred to as a land acknowledgement. It's so important to understand the long-standing history that has brought you to reside on this land and to seek to understand your place in that history. Land acknowledgements don't exist in the past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current and ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation in the long-standing impacts of colonialism. So may we give honor and gratitude to those original custodians who were widely subjected to genocide, ethnic cleansing, stolen land, and forced removal to reflect actions taken today by colonizers. Land acknowledgements alone, not enough. But it is a starting point as we're continuing our justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion journey. So in the metropolitan Arizona area, we inhabit Hohokam, Akama Atum, known as Pima today, and Atum land. So thank you for joining me in honoring the land in which we inhabit. So who am I and what am I doing here? My name is Jasmine. I use she, her pronouns, and pronouns or gender pronouns rather, are an important part of how people communicate. They take the place of nouns like names and allow people to easily share information about themselves. So although many people use he, she, or they pronouns, there are so many other pronouns out there, and you've received a handout from me. And if you click one of the links in the last page, the resources page, you can learn more about pronouns and what those mean to folks. But a little bit more about me. I refer to myself as someone who is healing from what it means to be Black in America. I've been a long time advocate. I've been doing this work for almost 19 years, I guess going on 20. So since I was in high school, I've been dedicated, actually even younger than that, a little girl really, dedicated to the human condition and supporting people in making things better and being nice to each other and making it easier to connect with one another. I do this out of concern and compassion for the future. I'm a mother. I'm a lover of friends and family, and I want to leave things better than how I found it. And I like using my personal privilege and my life force and my experiences throughout my lifetime to support people in doing this work and to continue and further my own journey in doing this work. And so today we got some more ground rules, some actual engagement agreements, how we're going to work together today so that we're really honoring inclusivity, but also creating that safer space for us to connect with one another. Because we might be talking about some challenging feelings may be coming up for us. And we want to make sure that we're operating in the best way possible so that we can do this work together. Number one, engage in open and honest dialogue. Participate fully, comfort plus one. So participate at your comfort level, but push just past that, because that's where that work really starts to bloom. Speak from personal experience, listen respectfully, seek to understand, and listen harder when initially you disagree. I find that I learned a lot when I'm emotionally activated by something and I may not agree with it, but if I listen a little harder, I stand the chance to learn something. Move in, move out, and encourage others to do the same. If you're someone who takes up a lot of space, it's okay to step back, share that stage. And if you're someone who doesn't typically take up a lot of space, come on, we want to see you shine. Be fully present. So I know it's hard, but no texting. Let's try to avoid our emails just for this time being so we can honor this work together. Be open to new and different perspectives. Explore the impact of comments and behaviors. Acknowledge intent. So if you've ever had your toe stepped on, it's like, oops, it was an accident, right? But that doesn't stop the pain that you felt. So there's an impact, and we want to consider and honor the impact. We want to take risks, be brave, lean into that discomfort. We want to respect and maintain confidentiality. So you can take the lessons from this space and share them, but let's not take those stories from people and share them, because that's not our place. Notice and share what's happening in the group and within you. Recognize that what emotionally activates you. If you are feeling triggered, share. And then trust that through dialogue, through us talking together, we're going to reach deeper understanding and engage in this opportunity. I mean, you're here, you've taken the time out to do this, so let's do this. So engaging, let's do it. I want you to type in the chat one word that describes how you're feeling about today's workshop. Open, eager, ready, curious, open, curious, anxious. Me too, just a little. I always ride that wave of public speaking, like, and then I get into the groove. Neutral. A lot of open, excited, says Dana or Dana?
It's Dana.
Dana, okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing, folks. So we're here to talk about implicit bias, but can I get some volunteers to tell me what they think bias is? So feel free to unmute yourself and share your thoughts on what bias might be. Amber says a preconceived notion about a group. Nora says in the chat, prejudice, assumptions. Sheena says your view. I like that analogy, Becky, an unbalanced scale. Can you say more about that, Becky? Becky may be typing, but feel free to unmute yourself if you want.
I'll go ahead and speak on it.
Thank you for those contributions.
Jasmine, can I speak on it?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Who is speaking?
This is Angela Salazar.
Hi, Angela, thank you.
So sometimes, we assume it's an assumption of somebody, but what I come to learn about bias is kind of how we grew up too, like our thought process.
Right, those messages we received coming up.
Yeah, what we gain from our family and our experiences.
Thank you. And I'm seeing some more in the chat. Oh, so it's okay, Becky. Kathy says only seeing your point of view as being right. An important thing to consider concerning bias is that everyone has it. It's not a good or a bad thing, right? It's an everyone thing. And it's also crucial for us to determine what biases we have so we can effectively interrupt them. It's okay to have an opinion, right? And it's okay to have an opinion that's different than others. However, when we make decisions based off of many of our opinions and personal knowledge, and we want to make sure that those opinions and choices are made with some understanding about cultural differences and are informed by broadened perspectives. So that's why it's so great to be in this space, because we're able to broaden our perspectives. But what we're focusing on today is implicit bias. So I'll tell you a little bit about explicit bias. You may have heard of it. Explicit bias is really the conscious attitude. You're aware of the stereotypes, and it's overt and it's intentional actions. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, but it's towards members of a group merely because of their membership to that group. Now, implicit bias, on the other hand, it's unconscious. It's the unconscious attitudes, stereotypes, and unintentional actions, whether positive or negative, towards members of a group merely because of their membership in that group. And these associations develop, like I think it was Angela who said, over a course of time, over a lifetime, beginning at a very early age through exposure to direct and indirect messaging. So when people are acting, excuse me, out of their bias, they're not really aware that their actions are biased. In fact, the biases may be in direct conflict with someone's personal beliefs and values. But there are things that we can actually do that impact our implicit bias behaviors. You can do things to either reduce or check that. We can focus on seeing people as individuals and letting them show us who they are. We can work consciously to change our personal stereotypes that we have of other people. We can interactions we've had where we might have an oops or an ouch moment. We can increase our exposure to other people, other cultures. I mean, it's 20 connecting. There's so much information out there. And we can also practice mindfulness. And so we're going to learn more about implicit bias and our own experiences with it. But first, I want to show you a quick video. And thank you for your patience on this. Here you are, friends. Is my audio, can you hear the audio?
The fields of neuroscience and social psychology has shed light onto the concept of unconscious bias. But what exactly is unconscious bias, and how does it affect our behaviors and decisions? Unconscious biases are simply our unintended people preferences. They are formed by our socialization, our personal experiences, and the representations of different groups in the media. These experiences act as social filters in which we make assessments and judgments of people around us. Research tells us that human beings have a natural tendency to place individuals into social categories. These categories are often based on visual cues such as gender, cultural background, age, height, or body size. We also categorize based on social background, job roles, religious identity, or political affiliation. The unconscious brain uses associations based on social categories to develop biases. For example, if we are constantly exposed to women as primary school teachers or receptionists, or men as plumbers and organizational leaders, these associations become wired within the human brain. The unconscious brain uses social categories to make unconscious judgments about people who are similar to us and people who are different from us. A common form of unconscious bias is affinity bias. This type of bias impacts talent processes in organizational decision-making, including how we recruit. Managers are more likely to hire people who look similar or with sounding names to them. Work allocation. Managers are more likely to assign key client projects to individuals within their teams who they have an unconscious affinity with. Performance. Where there is some kind of affinity, managers are more likely to spend time informally discussing positive contributions to the team and will focus on development and future work plans. For those where there is little affinity, managers are more likely to question past performance. The conversation will be less friendly and even hostile at times. Unconscious bias often results in a set of micro-behaviors. Examples of positive micro-behaviors include supporting the ideas of someone with who you have an unconscious affinity whilst in a team meeting, or simply wanting to have coffee with someone like you. Examples of negative micro-behaviors include checking emails on your phone whilst talking to a colleague, or cutting someone off in a meeting. Often our intention is not to make biased decisions, and through a focus on conscious thinking, and by creating inclusive work cultures, we can learn to control our unconscious judgments and mitigate the impact of bias on our talent programs. For more information on the nature of unconscious bias and how to mitigate its effects.
So I shared with you the link to that video if you would like to watch it again. And actually, this is a great opportunity. Something I forgot is to go over the details of the workbook that you received. Not too much information, but in there we have some definitions that I believe would be helpful for folks. We're going to jump into that assessment that's in there that from pages 3 to 5 or 3 to 6 rather together. We're going to go over a tool that we'll use for self-reflection when it comes to bias. And then there's an explanation of some types of bias on page 8. An opportunity for independent learning concerning microaggressions, which happens based on biases that we hold. And then there are some resources for post-workshop learning. And there's another video on implicit bias, the peanut butter jelly of and racism. I think it's an excellent video that helps explain what bias is if you still struggle with the definition or just want a refresher. So back to the conversation on implicit bias. Why does uncovering implicit bias matter? You can either unmute or you can share in the chat your thoughts. Oh, where was the...
I just put the workbook that Jasmine's referencing in the chat. It's a PDF, so feel free to click that and you can open it.
Thank you.
Yep.
So again, why does uncovering implicit bias matter?
It matters because like I was saying, in the case of growing up in family, if we only surround ourselves with a certain type of group, like I don't know what I don't know until I start exploring other cultures and other people and other groups.
I love it, Angela. I don't know what I don't know until I start for it. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, then we kind of learn and start noticing where our biases are.
Right. Through interaction, it becomes easier to uncover those. And it matters because it affects the bottom line of all of our outcomes and processes, like the decisions we make in hiring or leadership or community development or talent acquisition, or just how we treat other people, how we work together. It impacts how we work together and it impacts how we coexist. So I'm going to give you a few moments to open up your workshop workbook, and we're going to start at page 3, I believe. And if I could get a thumbs up when you are ready. And I'm going to take a moment to let my puppy out. So it looks like I'm getting some thumbs up. And I'll go ahead and go over the instructions while the rest of you are opening up your items or your document. So you'll have about 15 minutes to complete this questionnaire, and it's actually designed to create awareness of how subtle beliefs and behaviors can affect social interactions in everyday life. So you will not have to share your responses with your peers. So feel free to be super honest. This is a reflection tool for yourself, and you can take this in other spaces too. This activity is meant to evoke thought, reflection about situations that are concerning race, gender, sexuality, disability, weight, and I think age. And I want you to think about whether the stereotypes and attitudes influence your own behaviors. And so the instructions are, you're going to review the questionnaire I think it's actually this. So 1 being very uncomfortable and 5 being very comfortable on that scale. And you're going to sum all the points per section and record the score for each section on the worksheet. You will review those scores and we'll have a discussion in the large group. And some of the questions you may feel like they don't apply for you. So if that is the case, it's okay to put NA. So I'm going to turn my good old boy, Michael McDonald, on in just a moment. Do you have any questions before you start your work on this worksheet? All right, folks. Here you go. How are we doing, folks? Do we need a little more time? No? All right. So let's go ahead. Well, can I get thumbs up if you are all done with your assessment? All right, I see several thumbs up, so that's helpful. Thank you. So you had your 15 minutes to go, well, not really, less than that, to go over this self-assessment. And so what I want to ask the large group, and feel free to unmute yourselves or contribute in the chat, is what did you notice about how you felt after you reviewed your totals?
So my name is Dana.
Thank you, David.
Sections D and E, I recorded a mild to moderate negative attitudes and feelings. So I had to go back and look at what those were. And they were the ones that I felt like didn't apply. So like section D, the first ones, you don't know whether to open a door for someone in a wheelchair. I don't have a problem doing it, but I also know that sometimes they don't want you to. So it makes me uncomfortable not knowing whether I should or shouldn't, but not necessarily doing the actual act. So, and then watching someone park in a handicapped spot, it doesn't affect me. I don't know if it's supposed to, but so I kind of had an NA for that. And then someone walking loudly in the store, you know, I tend to mind my business. So that, that. And then in F, or not F, sorry, E, it was watching your friend sees an overweight person and makes a joke about him. That's going to make me uncomfortable because I don't think it's appropriate. And then the same with watching someone get stuck in a chair. I'm going to feel bad. So of course that made me very uncomfortable, which resulted in a lower score, which says that I'm mild to moderate. And I'm like, oh.
Well, there's some context there, you know,
yeah,
depending on the situation, I'm either uncomfortable for the person or feeling discomfort in general.
No, I'm just uncomfortable for the person. I'm not obese, but I know what it feels like to be mocked because of your weight. So I'm sensitive to that. So
thank you, Dana. Sheena noticed a high score in race and feels like this may be since I'm a person of color and have heightened awareness of it constantly. Thank you for sharing that. Did anybody score similarly in the race section? Higher?
So hi, my name is Monique. One of the things that was really interesting to me, so my wife is Latina, and we spend a lot of time. I'm white. I spend a lot of time in communities. We go down to Mexico quite a bit to be with family, and it's been, you know, it's become sort of like I am the only, which relates to one of the questions. I'm the only person of a certain culture down there. Oftentimes I can speak maybe Spanglish at best, but it's really helped me to realize, like, at first I did feel uncomfortable, just because probably more around the language, like a language barrier, but then it helped me realize, like, what this, like, again, my privilege in life that I have to go somewhere else out of my way to feel uncomfortable versus what this might feel like for folks who experience this every day, that it creates a barrier. So that the particular race question was really hit home for me.
And thank you for sharing that. Yeah. The interesting dynamic and difference between opting to go into a situation where you're one of few or none versus a lived experience, a lifetime of being the minority, for lack of better wording. Thank you for sharing that. Another question I have is, well, okay, does implicit bias
bigger?
Say that again? I think somebody's just unmuted. But the question again is, does implicit bias play a bigger or a smaller role in your daily experience, and what? And I think that person said bigger.
I did. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah. I said bigger. I think because I feel like a lot of the ideas that I have in my mind are uncrewed experiences, the things I've been exposed to in life, and I don't feel like that I have much of a choice on how I feel about something initially until I check those bias and make sure that I'm consciously not being prejudiced in any way or form. If that made any sense.
No, it does. I hear you. Sometimes when we're learning new ways of thinking, new behaviors, that automatic response sometimes seems as if it's out of our control. But once we are awakening our ability to see and confront those things and moving past the discomfort and analyzing, reflecting, and choosing in future moments to act differently, there goes the course of change. So I hear what you're saying. Thank you for sharing. And another question I have is, what do you think the sources of implicit bias are for you, and how those can be changed?
This is Amy.
Hi, Amy.
Hello. I think a lot of it has to do with our experience, because I scored a moderate someone speaking loudly. I just moved back. I lived in Honolulu, and for a year I didn't live in a very good part of the city. And so sadly, there were homeless, and a lot of the homeless were either mentally ill or on drugs. And they would be loud, but they would be loud and saying terrible things. And I would cross the street so I wouldn't have to pass. So even thinking about loud noises, and actually this activity helped me in realizing it's not the loud noises. So I think it's, for me, in that situation, it was experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. How we've associated with things, how we've been associated really impacts how we see each other and how we interact with one another. Is there anything that stood out for folks or that they want to share?
I do. In regards to race, the race section, I was all over the place, and that was one of my lowest scores out of all of them. Like, I've been in that situation where I'm like the only person of color in a whole sea of rich white people, and I felt like my power was sucked out of me. And but at the same time, like, I don't have no problem with, people who are not a US citizen, or going into a restaurant where there are other different types of people of color that are not like my own. So, when I looked at that, I was like, well, that's a little odd, because it was at both extremes. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. And this really is a tool to get you talking, to get you thinking about prejudice, but also your experiences may vary, again, based on how you've been socialized or what you've encountered in your lifetime. So it's not to label you in any particular way as super prejudiced or not, or bad or good. It's really a reflective tool to support you in thinking about getting those wheels turning about those automatic responses and how to confront those. Does anybody else have anything else they would like to share?
This is Dana, and again, and I just want to, I totally get what Angela just stated. I was born and partially raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, and then we moved to Washington State. So I totally get what it means to be the only African-American woman, child in most situations. And it was very uncomfortable at first. And I guess I just learned that I have to be comfortable with who I am, and just just maneuver in those situations because that was out of my control. I couldn't control it.
Thank you.
So, and then learning to be comfortable in that, because when I had my children, they would be put in those situations as well. And so just to be able to mirror that for them, it just helped me to be more comfortable. So those things don't bother me as much as they did when I was younger, if that makes sense.
It does,
But-
Dana.
But there's times, you know, when people will point it out or say something and it triggers a memory or triggers a thought or something to that effect, and it takes you down that memory
Yeah.
lane. So I totally get it.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you folks for being vulnerable and sharing. As Sheena says, I do appreciate the breakdown of the assessment as I've never thought about my implicit bias in these layers. Thank you, Sheena. And go ahead, Jen.
Hi, Jasmine. Hi, group. This is Jen Sanchez. It was a good way to look at those different layers of implicit bias. And I think what I mostly took out of it is just how much, us doing the D&I work have been practicing this for so many years. And it's so awesome that we are able to identify our experiences and our practices with words, right? Now that, so for example, implicit bias, we weren't using this word 10 years ago. We were using the word white privilege, and that was making people very uncomfortable. Now, I mean, you could say that anywhere, which is really cool. That people are on their journey and learning. I would like to say also, I've been a professional for 25 years now, and it's taken a lot to get to share my story. And so for women coming up on their journey, I don't want you to think like, well, I wasn't brave enough and I can't do that, because it's taken a lot of practices in the workplace. People are making judgments on us on exactly what we look like, because my face and what I've had to come to know is my face, my demeanor, some people are very uncomfortable with. And so I've had to finally, and y'all, 20 years it took me. Is it she's not comfortable with a strong woman of color questioning her? So those are some of the things that I think about now, but mostly just how we have to practice this, put ourselves in uncomfortable situations, ask questions. So that's what I'll share. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that insight. Yeah, it takes practice. And the moment we become stagnant in this work and say we've learned all we can learn, we're not doing it right. I'm by no means an expert. I'm just here to offer tools and support. I'm still on my justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion journey. I'm still learning so much. So it's so important to put ourselves in the space of learning and, like you've practiced, being vulnerable, trying, because what do we stand to lose, right? So let's go ahead and transition into a deeper discussion of prejudice, but also how it manifests within the system of oppression. So what is prejudice? It's an attitude. And how is that different from discrimination? Discrimination is an action. And if I have a prejudicial attitude towards, let's say, folks living with disabilities, I might think that people living with disabilities may have too much a difficult time doing certain activities. And as a result, I might take actions within my organization that reflect that attitude. I might use my bias to make decisions about what services to offer or how I assume people's needs and disabilities in the workplace. But I might also use ableist language. And actions, they don't exist in isolation, because this is happening in a society with groups having different levels of social power. And what is that? That's capital. It's a resource, it's influence. Able-bodied people have more of that resource than folks living with disabilities, resulting in a system of oppression in which the participation of people living with disabilities in certain spaces is impacted negatively. And in situations like these, non-existent social support to live and subsist make it extremely difficult for folks to survive. These are the trends of a system. It's not just simply the result of one individual action, but folks coming together who have been socialized differently, and those attitudes. So let's check in the chat with you all. Can you share any words that stood out to you, or any questions you might have about establishing the common language and understanding the dynamics of prejudice, discrimination, social power, and how that equals oppression? Moment, I was upset on the question about a friend making a joke about an overweight person. I am overweight, and I felt that survey was to imply that we were supposed to be okay with people. Thank you, Nora. I would say, and as an overweight person, the survey takes into consideration what people find not playing off of, but it's definitely inspired by real world views that people do have of different types of people and different types of bodies. Oh, thank you, Amy. Nora, did you find that helpful? And I thank you for sharing when feeling emotionally activated. But if you'd like to dialogue on that more, definitely let me know. Or if it was just a moment for you. Any other thoughts on maybe the previous activity or this current equation that's supporting us in establishing common? So moving forward, the reality is, as we've seen today exhibited, humans are complex, and we show up with unequal amounts of privilege, social power, access, and wealth. And we come from these different backgrounds with these different experiences that we pointed out through history. And those aspects of our experiences are the foundations and inner workings of the cultures, the institutions, and really the making of a new history. Our bias shapes and really constrains people's behaviors and choices. Events in history influence what we do and how we do it. And so in this graphic, we see that the institutions responsible for making the rules, the parameters, responsible for decision-making about people's life outcomes, and they're made up of people like you and I. You all have come here, joined today to do this work, but from different institutions. And people who hold and act on biases make up these systems. I cannot stress that enough, because remember, bias, it's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing, it's an every person thing. And people and their biases are also responsible for making up the rules and the norms that we work and live by. Our behaviors and institutions are products of history, and that history includes practices like, unfortunately, the enslavement of humans, the marginalization of others, or even violence. And overall awareness of those aspects in our decision-making power and what contributes to these institutions and their rules supports us in creating impactful change. So I want to come back to the large group. What are some potential impacts of acting out on our biases?
This is Amy.
Hi, Amy.
I recently facilitated a discussion and a leader said our intent and our impact need to be closely aligned.
Mm.
And when we act on our biases, probably they're often not aligned. We may not intend for someone, but our action made that happen.
Right.
So the impact.
Right. Revisiting that that analogy I gave earlier with the having your toe accidentally stepped on. It doesn't take away from the pain that it wasn't intentional. So it's so important to acknowledge that though it may have been an accident or unconscious, there was still an impact. Dana says, impacts decision-making. Can you say more, Dana?
Like, for instance, I work with the Department of Child Safety. So having that implicit bias or acting on bias can, affect the outcome during our involvement in that child welfare process.
Indeed. So another question 2, how does the concept of intention relate to impact? Oh, first, it's, I'm not sure your name, but it says, knowing why we are actually doing something. Yeah, taking time to learn. Taking time to learn and unlearn certain behaviors. Yeah. Again, how does the concept of intention relate to impact?
So hi, this is Monique. I was wondering something, and I guess also on a, in the nonprofit sector, as a business, and not just nonprofit, but as a business, it also is this, we know we need to do better. We know we can do better and we should do better. And when those opportunities and challenges arise, like, are we really doing it out of the best intention in that place and why we're doing it? Not just because we know this is what's happening in the world right now. We should have already been doing it. Like, are we coming from a very genuine space that not just because we know that these things are important in the world, but how is it actually impacting, our staffs, our teams, the folks that we serve in the community? And so, like, are we genuinely doing it because, don't tell me I have to go clean my room. I know I need to go clean my room, and here's why. So, like, what's that? I think that also plays into it, and is sometimes a lot harder also depending on where you're at in an organization or what your mission is, what your board allows you to do. All of those things also end up ultimately tying into it. But I think that's kind of was my point of honor as well.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is, yeah, there are lots of boxes to check and folks to consider and barriers potentially in the work. However, we want to, at the root of it, ensure that we're doing this with intention versus being performative and doing it for optics or trying to get on the train of looking good. Is that what I'm hearing? Was that a fair?
Absolutely. And way better said, yes.
Thank you. No, you did great. And so I'm going to return to the chat. I see Becky says, I still can't unmute for some reason. I'm so sorry. Darn Zoom. It depends on where the intention is placed. Am I using it as an excuse for my actions, or I didn't mean it like that? Or am I using it to take accountability for my actions and examining the motivations for my behavior? Absolutely. And I love that in this space, we can choose loving accountability. So when somebody oopses or ouches us, when we have been the target of a bias or microaggression or any kind of forcing you outside the margin of society, though it's not your job, it's definitely an opportunity to support people in loving accountability and saying, hey, you know, when you said that, can you tell me what you meant? Because I took it this way. Dana says, exactly, Cindy, diversity. Basically asking who isn't at the table for this discussion or for this decision that needs to be. Thank you, Dana. Next question I have is, what can you do individually to become more aware of your own implicit biases? What can you do to counteract them?
Hey, this is Angela.
Hi, Angela.
I've been on this journey of trying to counteract my own implicit bias in recent years. And the way I've been doing that is pushing myself outside that comfort zone and putting myself in those groups that don't look like me. And not only that don't look like me, but are in a different social class, because you know there's classism. So there's a lot of isms out there, but yeah, just pushing myself to feel uncomfortable. That authenticity too, you know, just speaking from the heart, speaking what you know, even if you're gonna get that oops moment, or you know, you're not gonna learn where you're going wrong unless you have somebody else point it out to you. And then just learning and reading about all those different other cultures and classes out there.
Preach. And also James says, educate yourself, understanding the reactions that you get, make changes. Thank you, James. Does anybody else have anything they want to share in regards to becoming more aware of your implicit bias and counteracting them? Oh, Cindy says, just being aware of your biases provides a lens of self-reflection and how one can change perspective. Thank you, Cindy. Okay. All right, so through the remainder of our time together, and oh wait, so much reading, finding trusting sources, and being brutally honest with your gut reactions to situations. Yes, Cleo, I love that. So throughout the remainder of our time together and outside of the space, actually, I charge you with thinking about effective ways of helping others and yourself become more aware of implicit biases. And I want to share, I don't know who came up with this graphic or this doodle, but I love it. And it reads, the longer you swim in a culture, the more invisible it becomes. And it has a little unassuming fish in a little fish bowl. Oh, I'm not sure your name, but I'm going to put in Valerie. Says, engage with someone who is actually in your bias.
Hi, it's Monique again. Sorry. So I mean, if I find that that I don't realize, like, again, reading something one not, but if all of a sudden I'm experiencing, or I'm all of a sudden going, oh my gosh, I'm having this unexpected bias, or this thing is, you know, if there's a certain, again, is it race, is it gender, sexuality, whatever it is, like, I want to have that experience where I can go and talk to someone and be like, hey, I don't have the same experience, or I am not feeling the same thing. What is this actually for you? Because I'm now creating this bias about something that I have no realm in, and not, you know, and not a person of color. So if I'm experiencing, or all of a sudden I'm projecting a bias, then let me go talk with somebody who's has that lived experience, so I can see the other side of it, versus, oh, I read an article that says I should, you know, not be an ass about certain things, or whatever it is.
When we're seeking information about other people's journeys and lived experiences, we always want to seek consent. Do they want to be a part of that conversation with you? But yes, that's a great idea. And I love the idea of asking yourself why. That is, I'm in a stage of my life where I'm doing a lot of reflecting on just my emotional stance and my mental stance. And I ask myself a lot of the time why, to help myself dive into why I feel and do certain things. So again, thank you, Monique. I'll try to remember that you're Monique. So culture is a way of life of a group of people. And that would include the behaviors, the beliefs, values, symbols that they accept, usually without thinking about them. Usually they're passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next. And it's the knowledge shared by the group of people. It's communication. Culture is a collective programming of the mind that distinguishes the members of the group or category from people from another group. And I urge you to examine the ways in which culture manifests in your life experiences, because it's so important. It's such an influential factor of how we treat one another. So implicit bias, we're confronting it. Now what do we do? Well, here is the space 2 technique. It can actually be used to help manage your implicit bias. And one great benefit of this technique is that it helps individuals create space, actual space between automatic reflexes and responses. And this acronym, I actually borrowed it from Felicity. Oh, I thought somebody was saying something, sorry. I also borrowed it from Felicity Menzies. She's the CEO of, Principal Consultant at includeandempower.com. And she promotes things like these to help in the planning of intercultural interactions. And this can actually be used to help monitoring your real life exchanges with other folks. So the first one is slow down. This gives us an opportunity to take a chance, step back, and recognize our bias. We want to act with conscious intent to be fair and to be proactive in situations where your biases are likely to be most influential. And conscious attempts at kind of, I guess, suppressing your bias are more effective at and judgments are really difficult to control, as we can see and we discussed, kind of habitual. And subtle discriminative behaviors or microaggressions, for example, they give feelings of discomfort and exclusion and avoidance, and that might leak out into your experiences with other people. So you want to be mindful of how you monitor your bias, including your eye contact, your body language, if you're smiling, if you're interrupting people, or if you're interacting with people who are different from you. The next one is perspective taking. And this gives us an opportunity to apply empathy and emotional intelligence. So with a conscious effort, we can work towards not generalizing other people, but enhancing our ability to interrupt those implicit biases. And then the next step is you want to ask yourself, kind of those activated questions, like I told you a moment ago. Why? Gives you a chance to examine your own assumptions. When you give yourself questions like these, it encourages you to examine those assumptions, give you a moment to assess, particularly when you have, really big decisions that you're making out in the workforce and in your personal life. Some of the things you can ask yourself is, does this person remind you of yourself? Does this person remind you of someone else or anything else? Or do you have a positive or negative association because of that reminder? Are there things about this person that particularly influence your impression of them? Are they really relevant to how you're interacting with this person, the expectations you have from this person? And what assessments have you already made? Are these grounded in solid information, or are you just making assumptions about a person? You want to also pay attention to objective information. You want to focus on skills and actively challenge any assessments you might have made by seeking evidence that backs it up and contradicts the assessment. So for instance, I heard a scenario of, I've always known women to be bad drivers. And the proof is in my grandmother. My sister doesn't drive, and I just cut off I got cut off by 3 female drivers who I'm assuming are female. Well, the reality is I've probably driven by just as many bad drivers who identify as different genders. I'm just noticing this and using it to back up my assumptions about other people. So it's so important to kind of question that evidence that you've pulled up to help support those ideas you have about other people. The C is for cultural intelligence, which allows you to apply a cultural frame of reference. When we assume stereotypes, we stand the risk of causing negative impacts for others when working across cultures. And while perspective taking for empathy focuses on the emotions of the other person without referencing cultural differences, making culturally appropriate attributions focuses on understanding the other person's perspective through the cultural frame of reference. Imagining the world from the perspective of others helps you transcend those automatic assumptions we talked about earlier of our own cultural framework being the norm, and allows you to really interpret their intentions and behaviors more accurately. This actually helps us reduce misunderstanding, misattributions, and conflict. And differences really will be less likely to be labeled as deviant or stereotyping, and based off of bias is reduced, and communication will actually be enhanced. And really the suspicion and the mistrust that people hold for identities outside of their own, that's actually minimized. Now, exemplars, I like this one. It gives you a chance to make positive associations. So using how you communicate to celebrate and acknowledge the success of individuals that are underrepresented, misrepresented, stereotyped, those groups can actually help you dismantle implicit bias by weakening the associations between the group and the stereotype behavior. So if you have not necessarily had the best understanding of Black community, or you come across many stereotypes in your existence, not searching for tokens, but searching for folks that we can celebrate, that are that identity, that conflict with the beliefs that you may have been raised with or may have been confronted with because throughout society, is so important. And expand. We can reflect on the unique aspects of the individual and create ways of countering our bias. So in this section of space 2, the last E, it's important to engage with diverse people in a really non-performative way. And we talked about it. Are we doing this with intention, with the desire to learn and to grow with others? Are we doing this for optics? Are we doing this so we look like a good person? Performative behavior is an action taken specifically with an audience in mind. And your goal is to elicit a certain response or action from others. So under the expand approach, the focus moves from one of them to you and me. We're not performing, we're not seeing them as other, it's you and me working together. Do we have any questions about this model? So definitely, I think this is an opportunity, excuse me, to share what you've learned in this model with your peers if you're looking for support on your journey of shifting those implicit biases. So you all have done beautifully well. I feel like I've been in a group of brilliant folks. Sheena says, I like it. And what I'm interpreting is to interrupt our reflexive patterns. Yes, Sheena. The fact that we have these patterns that we're not necessarily happy with, or that might hurt others or cause harm, doesn't make us bad, right? It's just an opportunity to interrupt those behaviors and reflect on them. And so the checkout question is, put one word in the chat to describe how you're feeling about today's workshop. What do you want to learn more about in the future? Reflective, informed, hopeful, inspired. informed, more informed. I'd be interested to hear some of your major takeaways from today's experience. And maybe a goal that you have after this workshop to help you on your journey with implicit bias. Thoughtful and educated communication, pushing my own boundaries, yes. I recognized an area of bias that I need to investigate. A goal from Amy is interact more with others who are not like me. Introspective, says Sheena. Goal is to dig deeper into the nuances of my biases and the reason for them. Thank you. And Cleo says, remembering this is an ongoing process and not something to accomplish. Right. It's not a destination, it's a journey. Understanding and recognizing bias in my life. Dana says, hopeful that these conversations will continue and or carried over to assist with difficult conversations with others. Thank you. And so, folks, this is my contact information and my website. Also, if you're looking to connect with me on LinkedIn, it's Jasmine Snipes. I see some folks have shared their information, so I'm happy to connect. And my folks at YWCA, do you have anything to share before we wrap up and give folks back the rest of their day?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of things. I'm the face behind the chat, everybody. So thank you so much for coming and spending an hour and 20 minutes with us to hopefully learn something new or push your racial justice journey a little bit deeper. In your emails in the next couple of hours, you'll receive the recording of this and a quick survey from us, just so we know that we're serving you the best we can. And in that email, there will also be some upcoming events and things that you can look forward to from YWCA, and of course, our contact information. So if you think of anything or have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. Well, you all did beautifully today. And thank you so much for sharing and being a part of this journey with me. And I'll give you back the rest of your day. I know it's always lovely to get off a few minutes early.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jasmine. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Awesome. A couple folks asked if they could have the slide deck. Is that something you feel comfortable sharing or no?
I do not typically share the slide deck.
No worries. No worries. I'm going to send out the recording to them anyway, so they'll be able to see those pieces that they need. So not a big deal.
That works. Well, I hope that went well. I hope it was helpful for folks.
Oh my gosh, I thought it was great. The conversation that folks brought was wonderful.
I love it. It makes me happy.
Good.
Supporting people and having really good conversations.
Yep. All right. If you need anything, you know where to find me.
All right. Peace out, folks. Thank you. Bye.